All right, take two. Hello, everyone. I don't know if anyone's still on there, but in case you're not, we're going to be posting this later. So today I'm really excited. I've got Dr. Aaron Balick on the line, well, on video, and we're going to talk a bit about trolling, especially in the light of all the stuff that's been going on recently. So in 2013, there were the threats against feminist and activist Caroline Criado Perez, and then after that, there was a lot of stuff in the news about the attacks on classicist Mary Beard, and now we've obviously got the Brenda Leyland case that's been blowing up. Aaron, why do you think people are trolling? First of all, maybe what is trolling, and were these people trolled, or was it something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the latest case that might be debatable. I think people thought it was trolling, and when I looked into it, I wasn't 100% sure. It wasn't completely kosher, but I wasn't sure whether it was trolling. Trolling is sort of the intentional online bullying attack of somebody else, usually with a kind of aim of disrupting a conversation that's going on or gaining some sort of attention towards the troll. That it's there's kind of points in a sense for the better you can derail a conversation or draw attention to yourself, usually by being kind of nasty.
Okay, so let's talk a bit then about what happened in the most recent case with Brenda Leyland, because it appears as though she was kind of maybe a misguided activist, because she actually did reach out to journalists on several occasions to try and put forward her case. What do you think happened then? Why do you think she resorted to kind of very public flaming when she could have taken a different approach?
Well, this is one of those examples of where technology and human psychology meet in very interesting places. So when you have any kind of technology, it allows a certain expression of some parts of your psychology and doesn't allow other expressions. And some kinds of technology actually invite expressions that we wouldn't normally share in everyday life. So a perfect example is something like Twitter, particularly when you have a handle that doesn't identify who you are. So anonymity affords you a bit more freedom to express parts of yourself that might be less socially acceptable. So it's unlikely that she would have been tweeting as much as she had in the manner that she had if it were directly associated to her name, because then she would have to take some direct responsibility for that. Once it's sort of slightly taken away from yourself because it's anonymous, you're more able to project some of your more nasty parts of yourself. And particularly if you're just using text online, that enables you to not really experience the other person as a real person, but as some sort of made-up object. So you're likely to not be quite as sensitive to their needs.
So what's the difference between people who take that route and those of us who don't?
Well, this is where it gets a bit murky, because I think all of us are more likely to express those aspects of our personality through that route, whereas those of us that might be struggling more or might be on some sort of towards the end of the spectrum of a personality disorder, where we might expect people to behave in antisocial ways anyway, they're going to take to social media even more. And some recent research has shown that people with high levels of sadism within their personality are not only more likely to be sadistic online, but are actually more likely to be online. So they're actually taking up more space.
Great. That's just what we need.
Well, I mean, this is why the Mary Beard and the Caroline Criado Perez, both of them who had massive Twitter followings, when you think, a certain percentage of the population are going to behave that way, and they're going to behave that way more online, I'm afraid we kind of have to expect that this sort of thing might happen.
It's interesting. There was an article that was written, who's one of the guys at UCL, professor over there, and he was saying that, like you're saying, that some of these obnoxious personality traits tend to be expressed a lot more online. So people who've got, just reading this out, so things like trolls having characteristics in Machiavellianism or psychopathy or sadism, but these kind of dark traits seem to be very prevalent in people who take it to extremes. Yeah, so what can we do about it, do you think?
Well, it's interesting because those traits that you just named in the recent research paper, they're called the dark tetrad of traits, which psychopathy, low agreeableness, high narcissism, and sadism. It's the four of them that come together. It's interesting. How do we deal with it? I don't think we're going to be able to police worldwide online social networks to the degree that you can keep these people off of them. But I think there is a point at which we have unacceptable behaviors in which the platforms have to take some responsibility for that. I also think platforms are probably going to develop in a sense where we'll be more sensitive to these kinds of things. We might be able to stay out of these people's ways a little bit more. But I also don't want to get stuck into these people and the rest of us, because these traits, particularly on the 5, we all have these traits. It's a matter of how much we express them. And when we go online, we tend to express them a little bit more.
So one of the things that people have offered as maybe a solution is either building in safeguards into the platforms that we're using, or to take these things offline and then legislate against the inflammatory use of social platforms. The problem with that is then it starts to impinge on free speech. So I don't know if there's a way to I know in certain communities on Twitter, people tend to self-govern or I don't want to say police, but kind of like that. That there are cultural norms that exist in certain communities or pockets that then ostracize people who exhibit these behaviors. Do you think that kind of social engineering is a potential way to kind of manage this?
Look, ideally, I would like to see cultures develop to self-manage themselves, and I think you do see this particularly on networks like Facebook, where you just tend not to stay friends with people who are going to be destructive to you, unless you happen to inhabit a network where everybody's kind of destructive, and that's the nature of that culture, in which sense you're in a sense opting in there. I think to legislate is to be. I think there needs to be some legislation, but I think to think you can legislate away trolling is misguided, because what it wants to do is say these are the bad parts of human behavior and we don't want to have anything to do with them, when in fact they are universal. They're universal out there in the street and they're universal online. So I think we have to accept them and grow some kind of resilience towards them and try and create communities that avoid it. But to think we're going to get rid of it altogether, I don't think, we've never been able to build a utopian society where there isn't undermining.
Yeah. All right, so if someone gets trolled, what do you recommend in terms of the best form of self-defense or engagement?
Yeah, okay, well, I think that there's two different things between the self-defense and the engagement. So on the self-defense side, and actually when Mary Beard spoke about this in The Guardian, I thought she did it really well. It's as if she'd been reading her psychoanalysis. It was great because the way she described having survived it's kind of ironic too, because she said that some of the tweets were so vitriolic and nasty that she knew in a way it couldn't have anything to do with her. Like that nothing she could have done on Question Time or wherever she was that could have provoked that kind of thing that would have anything to do with her. In fact, it was the stuff that was less nasty and closer to do with what she could have said that was more hurtful towards her, because she could take it personally. But the response to that is to say, this person, this troll, is at a great distance from me. They're responding to something that is a representation of me, but not the whole of me. So really, I need to take some personal distance from it and not identify with what they're trying to attack. That's the sort of self-defense, They're responding to some image of me that's somehow important to them that they need to attack. Get the distance. Out there in the real world, I think, one of the big things inside trolls is a high narcissistic desirability, which is a desirability for some kind of attention. And I know there are a lot that disagree with me, but I actually think the hands-off, ignoring it unless they break the law and threat or do something really over the top, not giving them attention, blocking them, and being in as if it's not happening, actually.
Cool. So yeah, I want to tap into a little bit more about the whole narcissistic element of this. I read somewhere recently in one of these sort of, I think it was Scientific American Mind, where they're talking about narcissism, and that if you consider yourself to be slightly narcissistic, chances are you are, because what would you call it? Yeah, but also people kind of have an understanding they're a bit narcissistic. So I wonder, I don't know if I have like a question there, because I think most of us have this hat on that, doing this now, I made sure that I, did my hair and I put a bit of makeup on. So there is obviously a narcissism inherent in all of us, which speaks to your point about us all having sort of a position on this spectrum, that none of us is immune or separate from these darker elements of society. So how much narcissism is healthy, to kind of go on a slight tangent?
Okay, well, we can talk about that, and people do talk about healthy narcissism, and we can get into the specifics of the use of the word, because the word, particularly in psychoanalysis, is pretty much always negative, because narcissism actually comes from a great sense of not being recognized at some point in your childhood. It's a compensation for not being seen, so we need to be seen even more. But to have a positive self-regard is really important, and in our culture, in North American, most Western European countries, there's a lean towards narcissism, like there's a lean towards extroversion, and the people who are less narcissistic or more introverted struggle in a culture of narcissistic exhibitionism. Really. It's a tough world. What you really have to start looking at is your relationships with other people that enable you to understand whether you're going the right direction or not. Now, real pathological narcissism means that you regard yourself as the sole important person, and other people become lesser objects in a sense. I'm more important. I'm better than these other people. It doesn't matter if they hurt their feelings because they're just the little people, kind of a thing. If you lose sense of mutuality and equanimity in relation to others, then that's really going to unhinge some of your relationships. It's going to make intimacy quite hollow, and you can get yourself into some pretty precarious situations. Whether you're too narcissistic to make that judgment is a question, but I think if you see repeated patterns in relationships that might have something to do with that, then you'd have to look very closely at yourself about that.
So are there any sort of safeguards against becoming too narcissistic?
Well, they hurt because narcissism is about ego inflation, right? So if you imagine your ego blowing up like a balloon, when it gets too big, we're getting too narcissistic. And what needs to happen? Deflation. Yeah, inflation doesn't feel good. Nobody likes that. But deflation is about allowing yourself to be impacted by others when it comes to feedback and criticism, to be able to hear criticism and let it hurt a little bit so you can check, particularly interpersonal stuff. If someone says you've been really insensitive to me and I felt hurt by blah, 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 don't minimize them and make them less important. Look inside yourself and say, have I done something here that was hurtful? And this is kind of where trolling comes in, because trolls get away without having to deal with so much of that interpersonal feedback. They don't see the pain in the other person's eyes. They don't necessarily see the damage that they're causing. And what you need is that feedback, emotional feedback, to readjust your own system to see if what you've done is, okay or not okay.
It's interesting. I was watching a talk by Cindy Gallop a couple of days ago. I think it was the one that she spoke at this thing called The Conference 2013 that happens in Malmö in Sweden. And she was talking about, well, she takes quite a strong stance on sex and pornography, and as a woman particularly, it attracts a lot of attention, both good and bad, and much of which is very strongly felt. So people have a very strong response towards her position. Anyway, what she was talking about in this sort of conversation with the audience at a certain point was about how she responds to trolls or people who are really quite cruel in YouTube comment feeds. And she was saying, well, the reason that she keeps them on is so that she can actually engage these, they're almost always anonymous young men, many of whom are virgins. So within that context, there are people who are kind of motivated to troll just simply because it's, at least in this case, she was saying 9 out of 10, out of a fear or a sense of insecurity or not knowing how to relate to someone that's saying something that they find very difficult. And she was saying that when she takes this off a public forum and then starts to communicate one-on-one via email with these people, that eventually she kind of gets to the heart of it and ends up helping them. And I thought that takes a very, like you're saying, resilient attitude to be able to engage people and see past the initial vitriol to the motivation that might be underneath.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to take up that mantle, you can do that, but it's a big job. It's basically enforcing that you take a relationship outside of that projection level and make it into a more mutual level and say, look, we are two people. And when you take it off YouTube and you put it on email, there's a more direct response, and the chances are that people are going to become a little bit more human. I mean, if you look at the Leyland affair, you look at her tweets to the McCanns, and they're all very robust, aren't they? They're all very secure, assured, robust. She gets unmasked in the street publicly in a way that you could say was trolling or bullying, a public, an unexpected public exposure.
Yeah.
And then we find that she's dead 2 days later. That there was that robustness came from a non-robustness. It came from a place. We don't know exactly the story of why she ended up dead, but we can guess to that. And a lot of these people who put this kind of robust exterior through certain social networks, that's sitting on top of a great insecurity a lot of the time. and if they're prepared to look at that and there can be a discussion about that, then there can be a kind of more positive resolution of the narcissism. But the person you're talking about, you know, it's a big job.
It is a big job, and then also just I mean, I don't. It's that whole thing of even just moving it beyond trolling, but you and I do lots of public speaking, so you know, you go on stage, you do your talk, you hope that people like you and they find value in what you're saying, and there's always that bit afterwards when you come off stage, and it's just the, you know, I'm going to check my tweets to see what people have said, and you're like 9 times out of 10, it's lovely and it's positive, or it's kind of more questions on certain topics, and occasionally you'll get one which will just be, even if it's just slightly damning, like you're saying earlier, and that's the one that you look out for, that hurts, and you think, well, that's 1 out of 100 tweets. Should I really weight it disproportionately? We do that. Why do we do that?
Yeah, it's called filtering, and what we do is we have these vulnerabilities with these vulnerable spots, and if somebody touches that vulnerable spot, even though 600 other people have said all this brilliant stuff, and one person gets it right, we feel hurt. And the fact of the matter is our egos are quite sensitive, and they're made to be on the lookout for criticism. So they will find that criticism, and you have to take, kind of in a sense, the executive portion of your brain, the more grown-up part, to, in a sense, compassionately understand that this is one of many, and not to ignore it, and not to not feel bad about it, but to acknowledge that you're feeling bad about it, and that there's a bigger story. I mean, I don't think you can step away from the pain altogether. Right?
Yeah, that's the thing. You're going, it's all right, it's okay, and then you're like, no, but it hurts.
Yeah, it does hurt, and the craziest, smallest kind of stuff can hurt, because so does all of our egos need to be so perfect in the eyes of everybody else, and as soon as we become aware of that imperfection, it hurts. But you know, you can't please all the people all the time. It's just the truth of it. So we're vulnerable to that kind of pain.
Yeah. Okay, one last point before we sort of move towards wrapping it up. I wonder what you think about the way in which, because there are gender differences, as much as I hate that there are, as to the way that women and men get trolled differently, and why that might be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on gender differences. I think we can make broad generalizations about different sexes and different genders, but there's going to be people all over the shop, you know, men who feel like women and women who feel like men, and they are just generalizations. But the fact of the matter is that when we look at like a real personality disorder, like antisocial personality disorder, you know, men make up most of the people who have it. Yeah, so we're talking anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5% of the population. Maybe that's a bit high. You know, let's say between 2 and 3% of the population may have some form of antisocial personality disorder. Most of them are men. For women, it's like 0.2 to 0.7 or something. So you extrapolate that online, it's going to be more likely to be the men that are online, not only with antisocial personality disorder, but with antisocial traits, more so than women, responding to women. Yes, so if you just look at the numbers, in that sense, it's more likely to be men. Also, we can have all sorts of cultural reasons for that as well. You know, men, in a sense, have a bit more permission to be more assertive and more aggressive in life. Thousands of reasons, but men are overrepresented in the trolling, in the public trolling of women, for sure, at least in our culture.
Sucks. Don't know what to say about that other than it just sucks. I suppose at a certain point it does become a game of numbers, where it's just, you know, if these are the people who are facilitated by these platforms and who seek them out actively, and they're also the most vocal, then obviously we're going to see them represented, I guess, disproportionately online.
Yeah, I mean, the people with those traits are also disproportionately online, so it's not men, but it's generally men with those traits who are then more of them online than in real life, and then you're just, you know, you've got 20,000 Twitter followers, a fair proportion of those people are going to not be very nice.
So there we go. So Twitter is probably nastier than real life, so at least we don't have to get weird ideas about the world being totally mean. Isn't it mean world syndrome? No?
I think it enables people to be nasty, but it also enables people to come out to the rescue, which is what I really like about Twitter. You know, oftentimes when those barbs come out, you'll see a lot more people coming out saying that's really nasty. And I think in the end, light beats dark in a sense. You know.
Yay! See you with your cloak on, so coming in so today. No, I think you're right. I mean, most of the time people are just genuinely seeking connection, I think. So, yeah.
I think ultimately that's even the people who are throwing the barbs, in a sense, are seeking some kind of connection. They want to be seen through those barbs. So it's a bit wiry the way they're seeking that, but ultimately they want the same thing, which is, you know, attention from somebody else.
Mm. Cool. So, any final words on trolling?
Gosh, yeah, I think we all need to learn a little bit more resilience and some acceptance, and I think particularly because of the thing that just happened, like we've learned with bullies, it's very easy to see the trolls and the bullies as being just bad people, but the chances are they're people who are struggling with something, and this is the way they're expressing their struggle. So we have to think a little bit more complicatedly about it.
So maybe a bit more compassion for ourselves and for the people who are doing
If
the.
we can get there, yeah. It's hard. It's hard when you're being under attack, but you have to understand that attack is coming from somewhere.
Cool. Well, Aaron, thank you so much for the chat. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everyone else has learned a lot. We'll be posting this up on my website and probably also on Aaron's website. And if you want to tweet to us, you can. Aaron is at Dr Aaron B, and I am at the website. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, Natalie.